It is July 2022, and there's a lot of talk about inflation, but not a lot of talk about what inflation really is. I'm in the UK, so this is our unit of currency, £1. And if I go to the store, I can buy a loaf of bread or a pack of chewing gum, maybe 3 packs of chewing gum. Why is that? Why is that £1? Why isn't it £5? Why is it not half a pound? That kind of question is key to understanding what inflation and deflation and, generally speaking, the value of money really is. So let's start with some definitions. Inflation is when the aggregate of market processes causes money to lose value over time. That is, prices go up. If I take this pound to the store in 20 years, I'd probably not be able to buy a loaf of bread with it, assuming inflation would continue on its historical trajectory. Deflation is the opposite. Deflation is when the aggregate of market processes causes prices to fall over time. It's not commonly seen, but for individual products we certainly do see it. Think of computing power. How much computing power would £1,000 buy 20 years ago versus how much computing power would £1,000 buy today? There's been significant deflation in the price of computing power. It is usually associated with technological progress, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of the story here. So now that we've defined inflation and deflation, we know what it is and the video's done, right? That is, unless we really want to know a little bit more about these market processes. So, who wants money and who sets the value of money? The answer to these questions are key to really understanding what's going on. Thankfully, the answer to the first question is simple. No one wants money. Nobody wants a pound for the sake of the pound. You could say most people go to work 8 hours a day in exchange for these, so clearly they want them, but that's not really the truth of it. If you were to be stuck on a desert island and you knew you were going to be, you wouldn't pack a bunch of these. So they don't have any intrinsic value, but we can exchange them for all the things that we really want. So we all want goods and services. That's what we're in the market for, not really the money in and of itself. It actually turns out that's an important property of money, or at least good money, but that's for another video. So, no one wants money. Great. What about the value of goods and services? How do we set those? That's a more complicated question. So, to illustrate this, picture a small market. Market participants show up with goods that they want to sell and some money to buy things that they want from other people. In this particular case, we've got a market with 4 people in it and only 3 physical goods. So, in the morning at this hypothetical market, we've got Anne, who shows up with 40 pounds and 20 bottles of milk, Tom, who shows up with 38 pounds and 60 eggs, John, who shows up with 18 pounds and 6 pieces of very intricate jewelry that he's made, and Ben, who shows up with 12 pounds and sells only his labor. In this case, Ben helps out Tom in his stall, and he receives a salary for this. Most of us are like Ben. What we really bring to the market is our labor. I've not added a column for labor since it's not really necessary for the explanation. So for simplicity's sake, we won't be including a view of any further goods than the 3 milk, eggs, and jewelry. Now, before the market participants showed up in the morning, they had to decide what they were going to charge for their products. So Anne said, given my history, given the difficulties of production, I'm going to charge £2 per bottle of milk. John said, I'm going to charge £1 per egg. Tom said £1 per egg, and John decided on £15 per piece of jewelry. For argument's sake, let's say that the jewelry pieces are all alike. So we end up with £40 worth of milk, £60 worth of eggs, and £90 worth of jewelry for sale in our market. That's £190, which is a bit more than the actual number of pounds in the market, which is 108, but that's not a problem. We can spend pounds more than once. I could give this to the grocer, who can give it to the postman. So our market day begins, and Anne goes to buy 30 eggs because she really likes eggs. Tom buys 8 bottles of milk because he's got a lot of kids and they need milk. Anne takes some of that money and goes to buy herself a piece of jewelry. Ben buys 2 bottles of milk from Anne. John buys 4 bottles of milk and another 20 eggs. And finally, Ben is paid £10 for helping out Tom. And that brings us to the afternoon in our marketplace, where Anne still has 6 bottles of milk to sell, Tom has 10 eggs, and John has 5 pieces of jewelry. At this point in time, Ben has £18 in his pocket, and he decides to go to John and say, I really like your jewelry, but £15 is a bit much for me. Would you sell me a piece for £12? And John says, make it 13, and Ben accepts. So what just happened? Well, what happened is the market value of a piece of jewelry dropped from £15 to £13. Because everyone else saw this transaction happen, and nobody's going to go and pay John £15 for a piece of jewelry that was available to Ben for 13. So this is how the market, generally speaking, pressures buyers and sellers into prices that are agreeable to both parties. If John had been selling out of his jewelry, it's highly unlikely that he would have acquiesced to Ben's offer, but he wasn't, so there was an incentive for John to lower his price. It is worth remembering that no one wants money, but it also holds that for all of the market participants selling goods, they don't want their own goods. Tom would only take the eggs to market that he does not want himself. Anne would only take the milk, etc. So, at the end of the day, John goes to buy another 6 bottles of milk, emptying out Anne's inventory, and at the end of the day, the prices in the market is £2 for milk, £1 for eggs, and £13 for a piece of jewelry. This is the process by which the market regulates value. It sends signals to all of the participants. And what are those signals? Well, in the case of Anne, she sold out her entire inventory at £2 per bottle. So what does that mean? Well, it means that for the next market, maybe she should raise prices a little bit or try to bring even more milk to market, because clearly at £2 there was an appetite for all of her product. Tom's got 10 eggs left. Maybe he could lower prices. Maybe he shouldn't do anything at all. If those 10 eggs are really difficult to produce or expensive, he could lower production to 50 and sell out. In the case of John, well, he sold 2 pieces, so maybe he should consider lowering his prices or even producing less intricate jewelry so that he could sell it more cheaply. The these are the types of signals that all market participants get all the time. For most of us who are selling our labor, it's really a matter of what's the salaries on offer. And obviously, it typically takes time for aggregates of signals to really persuade any market participant to change their stance, their price over time. This is what economists call price discovery. The idea is that goods unsold effectively lead you to lower your prices or lower your production, and that moves investment of time, of resources, into other more desirable goods. If you're selling out, well, then the incentive is the reverse. You want to increase your production, you want to increase your prices until you find that equilibrium point where the value of your production agrees with the value that the people buying your product are willing to pay for it. In any case, the market has to be free to set the prices, so it only applies where the market price is something you can agree with another party, that is, in the absence of any kind of coercion. This is also why we talk about free markets. Now, we spent, in this hypothetical example, £128 out of the 108 that were available amongst the participants, and this is not really a problem for the model, because as we talked about earlier, you can spend a single pound several times in a day, and this is what economists call the velocity of money. Now, having established this market with the equilibriums, people have found the prices at which they can exist where they're comfortable, they can make things, make a profit, and they can support themselves. Why would we ever change prices? Why would we not have £108 in our market forever, and whatever prices were worked out, say 1, 2, and 13? Well, there's always shocks to the market, always. But fundamentally, they come in one of 4 types of shocks to move things about from the outside of our little market. So what is it we can do? Well, we can add money to the market, we can take money away from the market, we can add goods to the market, or we can remove goods from the market. And let's look at each of these in turn. So what happens if we add goods to the market? Let's say Tom discovers a superfood for his chickens, and suddenly they're producing 40 eggs more than they used to. So now in the morning of our market, Tom shows up not with 60 eggs, but with 100 eggs. Well, Tom's not a fool, so he thinks back, and he says, well, last time I sold 50 eggs at a price of 1, and now I've got 100. So if I charge 1, what can I expect to happen? Well, he can expect to sell 50 eggs, or maybe the 60, whatever he was used to selling on average. But he can't expect to sell the extra 40. So, assuming that the extra 40 didn't cost him a prohibitive amount, his only real option if he wants to sell them, and he does, remember, you only bring to market that which you do not want yourself, he has to lower his price. That's the only thing that Tom can do to create an expectation that he can make more money off of the extra 40 eggs. So adding goods to the market, generally speaking, causes lower prices. Okay? What if we remove some goods? Let's say that Anne's cows come down with a disease and they just don't produce as much milk as they used to. Well, in this case, Anne shows up to the market. She doesn't have the 20 bottles of milk that she used to have. She's got 10 bottles of milk today. What can Anne do? Well, she knows she used to sell out at £2 and 20 bottles. So could she double the price? Maybe not exactly double the price. She could at least charge £3 per bottle and have an expectation that everyone else would show up and buy less. If she doesn't do this, Tom's going to come in, he's going to buy his 8 bottles, Ben's going to buy his 2 bottles, and there won't be any left over for anyone else. If she increases the price, maybe Tom buys 4, Ben buys 1, John buys the rest. But at least she gets to make up some of the difference from what she's used to, and from the loss she's suffered. So if we remove goods from the market for whatever reason, it creates an incentive in the market to increase prices. So that takes care of the adding and removing goods. What about the money? Well, this is the most typical one, so we're going to go through the full example. But adding money to the marketplace from out of nowhere is something that we see more often than not. The money supply, as it's called, has a tendency to go up over time. So let's again start our market day in the morning, but this time Ben finds a purse with 40 pounds in it on his way to market. So at the start of the day, there's not 108 pounds floating around, there's 148 pounds floating around. Now, how might our day play out like this? Well, we've got the same number of morning transactions that we've had before. Anne buys the eggs, Tom buys milk, a little bit of jewelry, Anne sells out, or almost sells out, and Ben gets paid for helping Tom. Exactly the same as last time. So that brings us to the start of the afternoon, where Anne's got her 6 bottles of milk, Tom's got 10 eggs, John's got 5 pieces of jewelry, but Ben has got 58 pounds on him. Now we know Ben likes John's jewelry. He really liked to have some of it, and now he can afford it handily. So instead of offering a lower price to John, Ben goes over and says, I'm going to buy 3 pieces of your jewelry. That brings John down to 2 pieces of jewelry and Ben down to 13 pounds, but John now has 63 pounds in his pocket. So he does the same as he did last time. He goes and he buys all the milk, the 6 bottles that Anne had left over. But he's got a lot of money, so he's thinking, I'm going to have a bit of luxury. And he buys the remaining 10 eggs from John as well. And his market price for his jewelry remains at 15 pounds. So already we're seeing that in the case where we've injected money into the market, at the end of our single iteration day, prices are higher than they were without this injection of free money. Let's have a look at the signals that this market now sends to the participants. It says to Anne, you sold out, same as last time. You should consider raising your prices for increasing production. It says the same thing to Tom. He sold out this time. He should maybe raise his prices, or if he could, increase his production. John's got 2 pieces left. He made good money on that day. There's no real need for John to change anything, is what the market's telling him in this scenario. Now, in this particular instance, the signal to John was, don't change a thing, keep charging the 15 pounds. But that effect came about because Ben found the purse. It could have very well been that Anne had found the purse and that she would have then spent that money buying all of Tom's eggs because she really likes the eggs. Either way, no matter who gets it, the prices will go up. The market will signal to the participants that prices should increase because of extra demand. However, the order in which those signals are sent will be different based on who gets the money first. And that becomes very important when trying to analyze the impacts of inflation, or in this case of increases to the money supply. Finally, we can look at what happens if we remove money from the market. So let's say that on the way to the market, Tom drops his purse with 30 pounds in it, and he just cannot find it. It's gone. So during this morning at the market, Anne's got her 20 bottles of milk, Tom's got his 60 eggs for sale still, and John's got his jewelry. Ben is selling his labor. There's only 78 pounds floating about the market on this particular day, and there's still 190 pounds worth of goods. So what happens? Well, day starts, Anne buys 30 eggs. But Tom is now reluctant to buy 8 bottles of milk. He does have the money for it, but he's got a lot less money than he used to. So, is he going to do it? The velocity of money has meant that Tom could buy the 8 bottles of milk that he's used to buying, but Tom is now feeling distinctly poorer because he is distinctly poorer than he was. So maybe Tom goes, I'm only going to buy 4 bottles of milk, and I'm going to keep some of this money until I can rebuild my reserves. I'd argue this would be the normal human reaction to this scenario. The upshot of this is, by Tom losing money, or by money being withdrawn from the system, demand is going to drop until such time as a new equilibrium can be found. And that equilibrium is going to mean that prices will have to drop in response to the demand. So, of the 4 shocks that we could introduce to our market, we've got adding money resulted in an increase in prices. Removing goods resulted in an increase in prices. Removing money results in a decrease in prices, and adding goods results in a decrease in prices. So that is to say, 2 of the effects here were inflationary, adding money and removing goods, and 2 of the effects are deflationary, removing money and adding goods. And that leads to a conclusion that inflation is really what happens when the ratio of money to goods in our market goes up, because the market pressures on all of the market participants encourages them to raise prices. Deflation, on the other hand, is when the ratio of money to goods in our economy, in our market, goes down, because the resulting market pressures will encourage market participants to lower prices or to offer more goods for the same prices. But probably most importantly, the exact chain of events here, the chain of shocks that we see. Ben finds a lot of money, gives a lot of it to John. John buys more stuff from Anne and from John, from Tom, and moving forward in time, Anne and Tom spend more money as well. This sequence of ever smaller shocks to the system, based on the introduction of money, in this case to Ben, is highly dependent on who gets the money first. And specifically, because the extra money increases demands amongst those things that the person with the money is interested in buying. And when trying to analyze the impacts of inflationary pressures, this is key. To see why that is, let's just think about the damage done to our system because of these shocks. The ultimate numbers, the final numbers, don't really make a difference. If I make £100 a month now, and I have to pay £1 for a sandwich, well, okay. If you give me a pay increase to £1,000 a month, but the price of my sandwich goes up to £10, well, then I can still exchange my salary for the same number of sandwiches. I've not gotten any richer, nor have I gotten any poorer. So the actual numbers aren't that important. However, the effects of the sustained effects of the signals that market participants are being subjected to, particularly as we've seen more recently with constant injections of new money into the market, can have devastating effects. The graph on the screen here shows the average house price index for the UK with a base 100 in 2015, and it shows the money supply index also with a base 100 for 2015. I think it's fair to say that a large proportion of the increase in house prices that we've seen pretty much all across the West can in large part, not entirely, but in large part be attributed to the huge increase in the money supply and the way in which this money was distributed. The exact analysis is too long for this video, but, well, I think it's fair to say that there seems to be some correlation between these two graphs. I should also notice, because this is something that you'll frequently hear when people are talking about inflation and deflation, is the impact on debt. And it's quite simple, really. If I borrow 1,000 of these from you today, and I can buy 100 sandwiches with these, well, then I've effectively borrowed the equivalent of 100 sandwiches. If inflation means that the price of sandwiches goes up over time to, say, double, well, then by the time it's time for me to repay you, I only have to make half as many sandwiches to make the money back that I did at the time when I borrowed it. That's a very crude way of putting it, but effectively, inflation eats away at both the value of our assets and the value of our debts. And that's great if you're in debt. It means that over time, your debt will be worth less in real terms. So you have to produce less to repay the debt. The opposite happens with deflation. In a system of deflation, you better pay your debt off fast, because it's going to get worse in real terms over time. And that's really it as far as inflation and deflation goes. Hope you find it helpful. Bye.